Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to yet another Thursday lunch. Wonderful to be talking to you all again this week. A warm welcome, particularly to those of you who are joining us for the very, very first time. It's great to see the comments coming in, so welcome wherever you are watching in the world. I see we've got people from the United States, Canada, India, New Zealand, so a worldwide following. So it's lovely that you are joining us today to learn more about historic churches. Today, it's great to be welcoming back Professor Paul Binski, who's going to be talking to us on the theme of A Tomb with a View, exploring medieval death and the macabre. So thank you very much in advance to Paul for joining us once again. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm just going to quickly explain how the lectures work. So you can only watch these lectures live on our Facebook. We do record them, so if you miss a bit of it, or if you ever want to watch any of our previous ones, or just rewatch it, we do make them available free of charge for you to watch recordings on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. They are only available on our Facebook page, and we never charge you to access them. So if you see anybody commenting saying you can watch them on an external website, please do not click those. Please don't click any of those links, as you won't be able to go through to those pages. Now, if you like these lectures, there are a couple of ways that you can support us. Please do share them, do like them, and send them to your friends and family. But please do consider supporting us by making a donation. We've got a special membership offer running at the moment. So if you join us by direct debit from as little as £3 a month, £3.50 per month, we're sending those of you who sign up as a member a free copy of Beautiful Churches by Matthew Byrne. And this is a wonderful, wonderful book that sort of talks about some of the churches that we have saved over our 50 years of being in existence. Now, you saw in that video one of our most recent vestings, which is from Loham. That church cost us £325,000 to do emergency and urgent repairs, and every year we spend several £1,000s on just that one particular church. We get up to normally sort of anywhere in the region between 3 to 5 churches a year, but obviously the impact of COVID may mean that we're getting more churches coming our way. So please do consider supporting us and helping us to care for churches on behalf of the nation. Now I'm going to pass over to Paul now. And he's going to, as I said, he's going to be talking about medieval death and macabre. If you have got any questions, though, please do just drop us a message, send us a direct message, and we'll do our best to help. But over to you, Paul.
Thanks. Are you picking me up okay?
Yeah.
Good. Well, hi, everybody. It's nice to be back. And I should just open with a quick apology that I've shamelessly stolen my title from my dear friend Christian Steer, a fellow tomb maniac, A Tomb with a View, which gets me into the bulk of my subject today, which is partly to do with the powers of art. When I say A Tomb with a View, medieval death, I'm really asking a question. Do tombs, do works of art actually have points of view? So my thanks to Christian. We begin with one of the great moments of transgression in the ancient world of the Mediterranean and the Near East, where Christianity is born. This is a very famous painting by the Italian fresco painter Giotto, done around the year 1300. The raising of...
I want to share your screen because it's not coming through at the moment.
Oh, okay. I'll have to, forgive me. Share screen, there we go. Are we away there?
Yeah, and if you just want to make that full screen, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. Hooray! Hi, everybody. Good. The Raising of Lazarus by Giotto in the Arena Chapel in Padua in the early 1300s. This painting is part of a great fresco cycle that was paid for by a wealthy and guilty banker trying to get his soul out of purgatory, which I gather you're going to be hearing about in the near future. What's going on here to the mindset of the ancient world, to educated pagans? Christianity is just a cult in the early Christian world, obviously, but what's going on here is deeply shocking. In effect, Lazarus has been drawn out of the grave at Christ's instruction. Come forth, Lazarus. A breach which the ancient world respected between the living and the dead has been has been overcome. The dead re-enter the world of the living. Mary and Martha, Lazarus's sisters, are there at Christ's feet. Those watching Lazarus coming out of the grave, being drawn forth as a kind of mummy. He's been dead 4 days, so he's really properly dead. They're covering their noses up at the stench. I show this because it's easy to forget what a shock Christianity brought about in completely reorientating the relationship of the living and the dead. The dead re-entered the world that was, to the pagan mind, the pre-Christian mind, exceedingly problematical. The dead were to be kept apart. The dead were to be buried outside of the city walls. They were to be prayed to, but not for. They were to be kept away. And at the heart of this, of course, is the readmission into the sanctuary, literally, of the dead body. Christianity is a religion of the soul, but it is also a religion, very importantly, of the body. And we would not have the late medieval imagery of death, the tomb, macabre things, if it weren't for this fundamental theological fact about Christianity, that Christ triumphed over death. The raising of Lazarus is the last great moment of his earthly ministry before the beginning of the Passion story. And the fact that he himself was God incarnate. So it's easy to think of everything being about the soul in the Middle Ages, in the Christian Middle Ages, and it emphatically isn't. It's really very much to do also with the body. So that when we go to great cities of the ancient world, Constantinople, Istanbul now, or Rome, here's the Via Appia. The tombs, the catacombs, the special burial sites are all outside of the city walls. Here's a beautiful shot of the Via Appia and roadside memorials. The dead are buried, in effect, in the Roman sphere, in underground cemeteries of this type. They can be Christian, they can be non-Christian. This is a shot of one of the catacombs outside of Rome. And they look a little to me like brutalist blocks of flats. It's well worth remembering that the Romans were flat dwellers, so they lived in apartment buildings. And of course, these loculi, or little slots, were for the bodies of the deceased. But that was outside of the city walls. Come the first centuries of Christianity, the dead are admitted not only within the city, but to the very heart of the sanctuary, to the very heart of the temple. For example, take the ancient Basilica of St. Peter's in the Vatican. Here is a view of the Christian necropolis in the Vatican, and here is a cross-section showing the great baldacchino, or high altar. This is where St. Peter is buried, and around it cluster the graves of the very special dead, the Christians, and so on and so forth. So there's a terrific, many-layered response to the arrival of the dead within church. The book of Revelation talks about the bodies of the dead beneath the altar. And this is a tremendous change in cultural attitudes towards the dead. And it has affected the design of our churches ever since. The churches are places, if you are privileged enough, in which you can be buried. And that starts very early on. And it's important to remember what a change in outlook this really represents. Well, of course, Christianity is a religion of the flesh. It is a religion of the body. And therefore, the doctrine of the incarnation of Christ and the doctrine of the resurrection of Christ, his triumph over death, which the raising of Lazarus announces, are fundamental moments. Here's Giotto again in the Arena Chapel in Padua, painted around 1300, early 1300s. The resurrection, the angels to the left on the empty tomb, and Christ saying to Mary Magdalene, "Noli me tangere, don't touch me, for I'm not yet ascended to my Father." And those key gestures which emphasize the tactility, the importance of touch, about which we hear so much in the Middle Ages. With the culture of the body went a tremendous sacralization of the body. Christ's body was, of course, itself sacred. But throughout the Middle Ages, as the very special dead, as Peter Brown, the great religious historian, called them, the saints, as they clustered round the churches, in the churches, and became great centers of pilgrimage, great centers of healing, as this occurred, an entire economy grew up around it. Everybody knows this. This year, we're thinking particularly about the translation from his tomb to his shrine in the year 1220 of St. Thomas of Canterbury, 1220 to 800 years ago. So, this is still something we think about. And the great shrines, of course, took many forms. They could be bits of bodies, as on the left, an arm reliquary. Burial really did cost an arm and a leg in the Middle Ages. And full body shrines. On the right is the shrine of St. Nicolas of Bari, Santa Claus, actually. The shrine is shown sideways on, but you can see that there are the sick are coming up to the shrine with their crutches. And very importantly, just on that noli me tangere, don't touch me thing, the importance of touch, the communication of touch from the dead to the living, a kind of holy radiation that emanates from the special body that's in there. And of course it affects the cure, and the healed are then seen duly walking away. Now these are commonplaces. People who study the Middle Ages know these things, but I think it's very important to what I'm going to say today about tombs and whether tombs have views, have a viewpoint, which is really the theme of my talk in a way. It's very important to understand that without an idea of the centrality of the body, we would not have the medieval cult of death and visual culture of death that we do. Now, the body mattered, the resurrected body mattered for all sorts of sophisticated reasons. And when you study the theology of the High Middle Ages, the 12th and 13th and 14th centuries, and you look at the great thinkers like St. Bonaventure and St. Thomas Aquinas, exact contemporaries dying in the year 1274, when you look at the sheer sophistication of how medieval people thought about matter, material, what it was, when they thought about the Eucharist, what the communion wine was, what the bread was, how it transubstantiated, or they transubstantiated into other substances. One can only be staggered. This really mattered to them. Scholastic debate about this thing was absolutely central to the whole question of identity and being. The resurrected body mattered because, as Aquinas and Bonaventure both argued, Aquinas stated quite clearly, we are not our souls. We cannot simply be understood as souls. We are actually our souls and our bodies, and in our bodies lies our ability to think, to intellect, as it were, and also to experience delight, because in the end, intellection, according to the sort of Aristotelian viewpoint, is based on the senses. If you don't have a body, you can't have senses. If you don't have a body, you can't, in a certain sense, experience things. And therefore, it's understandable that the doctrine of the resurrection of everybody, the general resurrection of the dead, mattered, because getting your body back not only restored your identity in some sense, it was you. It gave you the means to experience delight and fear, to always connected emotions in the Middle Ages. So we're looking now at one of the wonderful 13th century portals carved in France. This is the cathedral at Bourges, the great west front of Bourges Cathedral, where St. Michael here is weighing up the souls of the dead, and he tenderly pats a little soul on the back of his head, and the damned are being sent off to hell on this side, and through their very emotions as presented here, if that's the way we want to look at it, through their very sensations, we can read off their internal moral state, agony, misery on the one hand. But over here, their faces are puckered up into these little smiles, beatific smiles. These are the winners, they're the saved, they're the blessed, they're off to paradise. But they're not simply happy because they've won. They're happy because they're re-embodied. They can experience the delight of getting their bodies back and being able to think and to feel. And medieval art always fascinates me for this reason, because it's so full of thinking about opposites, about things that are connected but seemingly different, different affects, different emotions. Always in the Middle Ages, and our scales help to make this point, there's a concern with balance, getting the balance right. And if you make one point, you balance it, you compare it with an alternative and seemingly very different point to come to a view. And so, the idea that the resurrected are happy, that they are blessed, is represented in so many ways in the realist sculptures of the 13th century. I stress realism because I think macabre things of the type we get in the later Middle Ages are versions of a kind of realism without the art and the technique that enables people to do this kind of thing. Here's the west front of Leon Cathedral in Spain. What happens in the later Middle Ages, I think, couldn't have happened. So art itself has a view, as well as theology and religious practice and cultural belief. Not everything in art can be explained by culture, in my view. So here at Leon, we heard some organ music later on. It's jolly difficult, if I may say so, to do these lectures and play the organ. I hope you were suitably impressed by the theme tune. But here we have an organ that is being pumped with a little pair of bellows, and we've got an entire court of the happy. And they're not naked this time. They're dressed in their courtly finery. You've got a Franciscan friar, a prince, all the orders of society, and you've got a little angel who, like Herbert von Karajan, is sort of conducting the organ and with a cheerful dance, a sort of courtly dance. Well, the idea of the dance as a courtly and temperate and happy thing is going to reappear later on, as we know, and we'll get back to that a little bit later on. Now, the doctrine of the resurrection is a doctrine about flesh, and it's a doctrine about proof. It leads you to conviction, and an important thing that works of art do through their various techniques is to create a firm belief in you, the spectator. Yes, I see that is true, and that is the basis of faith and confident faith. Fides, confidence. Confidence has the word fides in the middle of it, faith. So here, this is the kind of imagery that is often sort of chortled at in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance of an angel at the resurrection. This is a detail from Lucas van Leiden's Last Judgment, and the angel looks back at us very winningly, and he puts his hand around this resurrected guy's bottom. This isn't hanky-panky. What he's doing is he's saying, yes, this guy is really and truly flesh. And when he says this guy is really and truly flesh, he's truly resurrected. He looks at us to commit us to the belief that the painter is trying to get across. Now, I'm very interested in these mechanisms because I am an art historian, and only sort of by borrowing an anthropologist and cultural historian and historian of religion and so on, I'm interested in how art does it and how art creates itself a kind of culture. So death then is a dynamic. It's something that can be used to think with, to get people to focus on ideas. It brings things to mind very, very visibly, very memorably. And it makes us think, and a key aspect of all these images is that they're there to generate thought in us. Christian doctrine is at the fall of man, when Eve was foolish enough to bite into the apple and pass one on to Adam. That Eve, woman, as was the belief, brought death into the world. An idea that's conveyed to us very memorably by Hans Baldwin, the great 16th century German painter. What a terrific painter he is. And look at the clever mixture of opposites in this picture. I want to go on this business of scale and balance and how one thing answers to another in these images. Here is Baldwin depicting Eve, a beautiful figure, obviously intended to provoke erotic thoughts, and therefore to make us think, to make us feel something, actually, that if you're a male or you find this kind of body particularly attractive, you feel that, and then you are instantly reminded of the price that we all paid, which is that sin entered the world with the knowledge of the difference between good and evil, and with that entered death. So the serpent coils around the tree here, and Eve looks on very coyly. She's got the apple hidden away gently behind her thigh there, and out steps death, plucking an apple from the tree, and again on the theme of touch and vividness, bringing this idea really to him. He grips her forearm and squeezes it, and as it were, we could almost feel that horrible sensation, and as the flesh and the skin drop off him. So these are very vivid images. Key to them is that they put forward a view without necessarily clobbering us. Shock is an important, or fear, as I'm going to show in a moment or argue in a moment, is an important dimension of this. Generally, works of art are what I would call soft power. They work by subtle, insinuatory means. They will use fear, they will use pleasure and delight. But in the Middle Ages, unlike the modern world, and unlike the world of Romanticism and the post-medieval world, in all these things, the techniques of, or the emotions of fear, of pleasure and delight are always on the way. They are always instruments. They're never the end. These works of art don't exist for the sake of the expression of certain emotions. Terror, fear, horror, delight, pleasure are all leading to something. And that too something ultimately in the Christian vision should be the amendment of self, the so to speak, education of the self, self-improvement, metanoia, repentance, whatever you want to call it. Now, fear, like the delight that is experienced at the resurrection, fear is a useful, a constructive emotion, and it often goes along with joy as part of the package. So it helps to communicate central doctrinal ideas. There's a kind of, in other words, in the Christian perspective, there's a kind of virtuous fear. It's not sort of Steve Spielbergian horror for its own sake. It exists and comes into being within us. It's stimulated in us. What we feel is the key thing. It's not what's depicted in the artwork. It's what we come to feel that matters, because that's part of the route to self-improvement. St. Augustine, one of the great fathers of theology, great rhetorician, one of the great geniuses of the medieval and early Christian world. St. Augustine says that fear of God, timor Dei, is the very start of meditation. If you want to contemplate something and meditate on something, actually fear is a great stimulus, and you focus on the image of death, you focus on your own mortality. It concentrates, as Dr. Johnson said, it concentrates the mind wonderfully. So fear is the start of wisdom. And here we can see this terrific image in Burgundy, early 12th century Burgundy. This is the great portal, unforgettable portal at Autun, carved around the year 1130, which has a conventional representation of Christ in judgment there to either side. As at Bourges, you've got the saved and you've got the damned, and you've got a truly ghastly set of demons and awful punishments going on. The demons are like, they're constructed out of celery sticks. Even the angels are very strange looking creatures. This is a kind of realism. It's a sort of hyperrealism, which has nothing to do with photographic realism or naturalism, but it has terrific power or vividness, energeia, as it was called in the Greek world, evidentia in the Latin world. It brings it before your eyes. And the inscription running along the bottom here says, as you can see, teriat hic terror quos terreus alligat error, nam fore sic verum notat hic horror specierum, horror, terror. May terror here terrified those who from worldly error it snares, whom worldly error ensnares. That's that grip of death. The sin is like a trap or a snare or grip. For thus on the door, truth depicts the horror of these particular sites. This is not horror for its own sake. It is to bring about timor Dei, beneficial fear, which leads you to understand the consequences of your own actions. It is part of moral self-enlightenment, which lies at the heart of the doctrines of the church. So there is one medievalist has called this philopassionism. It's the understanding that suffering is not loved, or suffering or fear, pain, difficult things are not loved for their own sake. Philopassionism is the route through beneficial fear and suffering to greater wisdom, higher understanding, and ultimately your liberation from sin and from evil. So once we understand that, we can start to see how these images work. And I emphasize the question of a certain kind of realism, because what I want to say is that what we often call the macabre is not a genre at all. I like to talk about macabre things because I think many things in the world of Christian art are macabre. Take that cross I'm showing you now on the left-hand side. It's from Santa Maria in Capitol in Cologne, made around 1304. It's a very impressive, slightly archaic, very peculiar image of Christ pinned to a Y-shaped cross, not a T-shaped cross, but a Y-shaped cross, and covered with wounds, peppered with wounds. These were called, this kind of cross was called the crucifixus dolorosus, the sort of dolorous or painful even the word sounds sort of heavy and somebody collapsing. The agonized cross, as it were, they were very common from the mid-13th through to the 14th centuries, and you see a lot of them in Germany and the Germanic territories in particular. And on the right-hand side, I'm just comparing one of the most famous representations of a cadaver on a tomb. It's the famous tomb, originally huge tomb, multi-layered tomb in Avignon. It commemorates the transi tomb of Cardinal Jean de Lagrange. It was originally accompanied with all sorts of layers of images of Lagrange himself praying, and the Virgin Mary, and so on. So it was part of an immense tiered sort of spectacle. Well, this is what survives of it. And it has a very pathetic inscription in which he says that he, Lagrange, a proud cardinal who was buried, his intestines were buried in France. He was a canon of Amiens Cathedral. He had many tombs, he could afford it. And he ran up a very grand one in Avignon, which of course was where the papacy was at the time, or what it had been. He ran up this grand tomb. He said, "I've been made a spectacle to the world. Here I am, without my cardinal's finery, like a corpse." And he really does look like a cadaver. And that idea of being made a spectacle, that you are shown up, that suddenly a brilliant light is shone on you in your humiliation, a word that comes, of course, from being brought to earth, humus, humiliated, brought low. That idea is morally very powerful. And that is, of course, a classic kind of image that we find in the later 14th and 15th centuries. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a wee moment. Now, these fork crosses or dolorous crosses, as I say, had a doctrinal purpose. They served the cult of Corpus Christi, the cult of the body of Christ. And it's fairly clear that visionaries of the 14th century saw in these crosses something terrible and remarkable. St. Bridget of Sweden, who had a series of revelations later in the 14th century, says that she had a terrible vision of a crucifix in which Christ's guts had so shrunk inwards that he appeared to have no abdomen, that his intestines, as it were, had simply disappeared. And she claims this as an original vision, but it seems to me that she might very well have seen crosses of this type, where, as you can see, Christ's body is treated in exactly that kind of way, with the guts and the abdomen disappearing, and in a way that I think is arguably realist and macabre. Key to this, here's a horror. Sorry if you weren't expecting that. That's a particularly horrid image, German image for the 15th century, with worms and snakes and so on. The key thing here, I think, on this kind of thing, as on the cross, they're peppered with wounds and great gouts of blood running out of it. This terrific, sudden, dramatic sharpness of focus. Key to this is what I would call the eloquence of particularity, that we're suddenly drawn to the details. The detail of these, the kind of captivating power of details, persuasive power of details is made very evident to us. And I think the macabre is very much about the eloquence of particularity. It has a particular thing that grips our attention. In his Poetics, the philosopher Aristotle talks about the nature of fascination, that it has this compulsive force. And he says that we're fascinated by things that repel us. It's very interesting that he thinks of fascination as something that we don't want to look. We kind of do this as with a horror film, but we do see. We kind of peek through and we look at it. It's a very good understanding of the nature of human attention. And fascination, it seems to me, is very key to this realist aesthetic, this vivid aesthetic in which the power lies in details. Well, I'm on a sort of roller here with corpses. This is just to remind us that real bodies, when they get into this sort of state, are all different. And it's not just the skull and crossbones, it is the horror that makes us look, but we don't want to look. This is the Capuchin Catacomb in Palermo, but you can see these all over Italy. And I don't know if you have ever been to one of these places, but they're pretty hair-raising, I have to say. And the surprising thing is how tiny the corpses are. Well, the medieval mindset is very good at instrumentalizing these things, to turning them to good purpose, that fear can be beneficial, that we can use detailed things to capture our attention more than generalities. if you want to really capture people's imagination, make it detailed, provide evidence, evidentia, to support your case. And these things get built in the 14th and 15th centuries, the great age of macabre things. They get built into the way all these images actually work. And I want to look at one famous one because it's such a well-known image, but it tells us so much. It always intrigues people. This is the three living and the three dead. It's from a famous illuminated book of the early 14th century called The Psalter of Robert de Lisle. It's in the British Library. And it shows quite a widely known tale that seems to have originated in courtly circles in the vernacular of three young men, three young princes who are out hunting, aristocratic pursuit. They're out in their finery, powdered, their beautiful hair curled, their lovely gloves, and one's got a hawk, which is an aristocratic sign of the huntsman, people who own land. And they've got fur, another sign that you own a lot of land. And they have the shock of encountering themselves in a kind of temporal reversal where they see themselves as they're going to be as corpses. They bump into themselves. So it's what's that nightmare of looking into a mirror. Of course, filmmakers have used this often enough. When you look into the mirror and the face drops away and you see the horror underlying it. Well, here it's starting, because the mirror, the double image, the doppelganger are always of shaking us, disturbing us into understanding or into thinking. Because medieval works of art don't really tell us what to think, but they do get us to think. In that sense, they may have views, but they don't compel us to adopt those views. And there are inscriptions that bring it to life, and these are amongst the earliest inscriptions of their type, actually, in English. I'm afraid, ich am afeard, lo, what ich see. I think I see three devils, and these guys lament, I was well fair, such shalt thou be. And they kind of literally mirror one another with their postures and so on. So the point of this is that, as the poem underneath makes clear, while you're alive, you can mend your ways. When you're dead, it's too late. There's still time. Repair yourself, mend your ways, repent, metanoia, have a change of heart, because the work of art is instrumental in bringing about change, and it's up to you, the viewer, to decide what that change is. And horror, the beneficial horror, and fear play a very important role in that. Now, as I've sort of tried to argue all along, just as sort of fear and delight go together, so do beauty and ugliness. A moment ago in the three living and three dead, we saw three beautiful things confronting their ugliness. But beauty is important also to the tomb with a view, because there's an immensely strong tradition from the ancient world and through the Christian world of praise for the dead, panegyric or eulogy. The funeral eulogy, that when you reflect on somebody's life in an artful way, you reflect not on their faults alone. You may think about them, but you also reflect on their beauty, their outstanding moral features, their physical beauty, their conduct, and so on. And therefore, the tomb beautiful, it becomes not only a sort of focus of delight. It gets across a certain set of values too, that the idealized self is worth striving for. Of course, there's a class discourse here too. You know, the aristocratic body is inherently a thing of beauty until it's shown up in the case of the three living and the three dead. And here you've got the magnificent effigy on the left of Queen Eleanor of Castile, made in the early 1290s at Westminster Abbey. One of those great masks of dignity, rather like Tutankhamun, you know, those eternal images of beauty and stability, and made of metal and particularly gold and jewels. And on the right, a white marble French effigy of Robert of Artois, which is now at Saint-Denis, from the early 14th century. Again, a sort of perfected image of beauty, inherent beauty, the beauty of the soul, the beauty of power. Kings very seldom show themselves as corpses on tombs in the macabre way, but churchmen and others most emphatically do. Because you see, the tomb with a view, the tomb has many views in a way. The tomb is a thing of paradox. The Bible refers, does it not, to the whited sepulchre, that we are if we're hypocrites, we're whited sepulchres, we're great on the outside, but we're rotten to the core inside. White marble, as we saw a second ago at Saint Denis, was a very fashionable building material of the time, but it has a poetic, white marble, cleanliness, like ivory, stands for virginity and for purity. And the tomb designers of that period were so sophisticated, they thought very hard about the ironies of life. There are some really beautiful tombs in Portugal and Spain, which are untouched, undamaged for the most part. Well, to tell you the truth, these are slightly damaged, but mine weren't. They're fine. The tomb at the Cistercian monastery of Alcobaçar in Portugal, on the left, is the tomb of Inés, who was the mistress of Pedro I of Portugal. She was put to death, ended badly. And on the right is King Pedro himself, died in 1367, showing, very unusually, a dynamic image, because I'm trying to stress process, change, and dynamic. The Wheel of Fortune carved on the end of his tomb, that doesn't occur very often, but it does provoke some of my final thoughts. I'm just going to take a sip. Yeah, the life of King Pedro and the fortune of the self. Fortuna is not a Christian concept, but fortune operates on us all. And indeed, fortune was a perfectly legitimate image to have at a church. At Rochester, here on the left-hand side, is a beautiful Wheel of Fortune, which sits opposite the bishop's throne in the cathedral at Rochester. Excuse me, and that brings me to the beginning of my final thoughts, because I want to think about this question of how we turn things over in our mind. The wheel as a metaphor really thought that we can have a view, but that we can review things. One of the most famous of all English tombs is the tomb of Henry Chichely in Canterbury. All tomb enthusiasts know and love this tomb, much restored as it is. Erected in the 1420s, Chichely, Archbishop of Canterbury, died in 1443, I think. And it was raised opposite the bishop's throne. It was in the same position as the Wheel of Fortune at Rochester. Chichely contemplated his own tomb for the better part of 20 years. It was made earlier in his life. And it has an inscription which is in a way circular. It alludes to the up and the down of the Wheel of Fortune. Born poor, very important, because in poverty lies virtue. Pauper natus, raised to the archiepiscopate, elevatus, to be primate, and then laid low, prostratus. The wheel turns for us all. Because if tombs have views, they also ask questions. There's quite a lot of debate, I think fruitless debate, about whether, does the effigy on top come before the effigy below, what it would seem to, or is which way around does it work? Or do we not, in reality, as I think we do, we just go round and round and round, we turn it over in our mind, because it never resolves itself. When somebody tells you that medieval art, or if anybody tells you that medieval art gives you the answers, it doesn't. It gives you the questions, which you are expected to supply to the best of your ability. Round and round, like these little ivory Memento Mori items. There was a great show organized by Stephen Perkinson a little while ago, and there's a great catalogue of these little 16th century pocket ivories that you can hold in your hand, and you turn them round and round, and they show very much as the three living and the three dead do. These they show these images of death to make you think, and also that you touch it, you can actually feel it in a way that is uncanny, but brings it very much to mind, because touch can do. Touch doesn't necessarily tell you as much as sight, but nonetheless, in the Middle Ages, touch and taste, which was thought in the Middle Ages to be a species of touch, were very important. Very often, Christian writers used the idea of taste, tasting God, as a form of touch, as a way of really knowing it. Homo sapiens, knowing man, comes from the word sapere, to taste. Wisdom is a form of tasting. Yeah, and of course another image that goes round and round and compels us, but also makes us think, is the image of the dance of death. And there they go round and round, often painted in cemeteries, very much a 15th century theme, not so much earlier. Emphasizing this whole question of which comes first. What is cause and effect? Is death the cause? Is the fall the cause? What causes what? And that idea of temporal reversal is to me very attractive, but it gets us away from any straight idea that there's a narrative involved in these particular images. Well, we live in difficult times, and I can't resist sort of winding my thoughts up this afternoon with some thoughts about our present condition. In 14th century Flanders, here is a picture from the time of the Black Death. Images of this type were being painted, and they are horribly reminiscent of the newsreel footage that we are seeing at the moment. I think the experience of Europe in the middle of the 14th century brings things into focus in several ways. The first thing to bear in mind is that one thing I want to get across is that art has its own way of developing. The idea of the importance of fear and of death and of thinking about the death and of having contempt for the body and yet acknowledging the power of it, those have been there since the early church. Art arrives very late in the day in some ways to illustrate these kinds of things. And when it does, it's often reflecting on itself. I mean, when the three living and the three dead are painted, this is a slightly souped up version of a painting in the Caposanto in Pisa. It's well difficult to read now, by Traini, probably painted before the Black Death. The three, in Italy, the three living are on horseback and they come across themselves. And you can see how even the horses are kind of revolted and they cover their noses up. So there are little echoes of the Raising of Lazarus there, are there not? That art, without having its own autonomy, does come up with ideas. And yet, why does it come up with the ideas when it comes up? Well, the Black Death, let's just think about it, statistically, is believed, there's a great deal of debate about this, and probably rather as now, a lot of regional variation, but estimates for the total mortality are between 1/3 and 2/3 of the population, something like that. Translate that into the modern population of over 60 million, that would mean that, if this were to happen now, we would lose between 20 and 40 million people. I don't wish to minimize the impact of the coronavirus. It's just that the way that the present situation has made me think, as somebody who's often wondered about the impact of the Black Death and the rise of, or how cultures change things and whether they do. It's made me think again about this whole question of the importance of the Black Death, because I think what we're also seeing is that the coronavirus, the epidemic, doesn't in itself innovate, but what it does is it massively accelerates existing trends, that if innovations are out there, suddenly they gain importance. And I think the same thing happens in the middle of the 14th century. I used to be a bit skeptical about the idea that macabre things began as a result of the Black Death, but I just want to end with one image which has always fascinated me. And for people who do brass rubbing and who like English parish churches, it's quite a well-known thing, but it is in its way rather remarkable. It's a little brass plate in the church of Brightwell Baldwin in Oxfordshire, and it's the first extended epitaph in English. We saw English captions in Three Living and Three Dead a little while ago. And it commemorates this inscription. I should add that it has a stone indent above it, or had a stone indent above it, which showed that it had a little figure with a shroud, and you could see the top knot in the indent. I've drawn in a face from the Three Living and Three Dead. I sort of borrowed this, but it's pretty clear from the contents of the inscription that they were thinking along these lines. And it was made for a man called John Smith, who we know from brilliant work in the Oxfordshire estate records was the kind of peasant farmer in 1345 who survived the plague and suddenly found himself surrounded with estate land that nobody could use or wanted because all the owners were dead. And so he consolidated all the land and he became what we would now call a yeoman farmer. He grew enormously in wealth. So he got through the first wave. And the problem was with the Black Death or bubonic plague was that it came back. And what demoralized populations, I hate to say it, was the fact, not the first one, it was the fact that it just wouldn't go away. It keeps coming back, and it's pretty clear that John the Smith, poor chap, died in one of the second waves in the 1370s, to judge by the circumstances of this particular and the appearance of this particular brass. And it tells us in Nicolas, I won't read it out because I can't do Chaucerian English, but it says that it opens with the sort of, behold, man, come and see how all the dead shall be, which is to say, you know, rather this is a spectacle, rather as on Cardinal Lagrange's tomb, that when death comes to you, you're naked and rotten. We have nothing when we fare away. Nothing have vi ven away fare. All is other men's that be for care. In other words, you can't take it with you. It's going to be up to somebody else to sort it out. Other men's. But that you do for God's love, except for that which you do for God's love, you have nothing. You have nothing there. Under this grave lies John the Smith. God give his soul heaven, grit, or peace. Well, it couldn't be simpler. But it kind of ties together some things I've talked about today, and particularly this idea of death as a spectacle, and the idea that you can improve yourself. You've still got scope to improve yourself and bring about a better condition for yourself. I think it's a very powerful image. And the key thing is that it comes after the Black Death, and as a result of somebody who benefited from the Black Death. This is a kind of guilt issue, I think, for John the Smith. So do tombs have views? Is there a tomb with a view? Yeah, but what matters is what we make of them. And I think in the Middle Ages, they understood that very well. So on those gloomy final notes, I shall now end and hand you over, because you may or may not have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's been a phenomenally fascinating and deeply interesting lecture. So thank you so much for that. As Paul's just said there, everyone, for those of you who are joining us the first time, at the end of our lectures, we always give you the opportunity to ask our guest lecturer any questions you have. So if you've got questions, please do comment on Facebook, and we'll try our best to put those to Paul. Now, Paul, jump in. Again, these lectures are always free of charge, and it's great that we can offer them to you for free. But please do consider supporting us in our mission to care for historic churches across England. As I said earlier, you can text us, so you can text CCT to 70331 to give a gift of £3, or you can take up our special membership offer, whereas if you join us by direct debit, from £3.50 per month, we're sending a free copy of Beautiful Churches by Matthew Byrne. And there's a link in the chat if you want to take up that membership offer. But if you've got any questions, do give us a shout. So Paul, I'm going to jump straight in with some questions. So the first one here I think is really interesting, and it talks about the Cathars. And this person's asked, the Cathars in France or Spain leave any form of imagery that differs from the stuff you've sewn, because their approach to the soul and the body was so different to the Roman Catholic Church. Hell was actually life on earth, with reincarnation of the soul being standard belief.
Yeah, that's an absolutely wonderful question, because the short answer is I'm not sure that this has really been fully explored. If there are Cathar images, I'm not sure if I know what they are. It's very interesting. What I was thinking was is how few, if any, heretical images survive from the Middle Ages. The charge of heresy was an easy one to level. And interestingly, you may recall I showed the Y-shaped cross earlier on. Well, those Y crosses, one of them was actually brought to London in the year 1304, the same year as the Cologne one, and was suppressed immediately because the bishop, it was the first thing about it, like all slightly edgy things, it wasn't a Cathar image, but it got into difficulty. And the bishop called in the artist, who was German, and the rector of the church, and said, what on earth are you playing at? This cross is the wrong shape. We all know that the crosses are T-shaped and not Y-shaped. And it was taken down, and we're told it was disappeared by night. I think it's just sort of disposed of. I'm not shedding much light on the Cathar situation. I think the difficulty is that obviously heretical things would be purged and censored out of existence. But absolutely right. I mean, indeed, heretical belief. I think the Cathars do subscribe, I think, to metempsychosis. They're sort of Platonists who believe in the reincarnation. Reincarnation, a difficult thing to illustrate. But they weren't sacramentalists, let's put it like that. So, you know, this is a whole wonderful thing about, you know, if you want to damn an image, call it heretical, and it will normally, it may or may not be dealt with. It's not a very good answer, but anyway.
No, thanks for that, Paul. And
great question.
No, absolutely, great question. And, you know, all we have to do is look at a lot of our churches to look at the impact of the Reformation when, you know, if they
of course.
What happened to places like Ely Cathedral with the Lady Chapel there.
Yeah.
Going on to the second question here, someone's asked, given that the Leon sculptures look elongated, is this because the viewer would be looking from them from the ground, sort of at a lower angle, and therefore it's to, you know, instead of it looking like a 2D flat image, it has a bit of a 3D dimension?
Well, they don't in the Middle Ages tend to. What you're talking about is a kind of optical compensation for the spectator position. And the truth of the matter is that is more a Baroque thing to do. You know, Bernini would do it, you know, you would adjust your figures for the perspective view. They don't take quite, on the whole, they don't take quite that optical view. So if an image is elongated, look at the figures of Autain, my word, those sort of celery stick demons and great drawn out things. That's not to do with the position of the spectator, it's to do with the sheer weirdness of the way they represent things. You know, things can be powerful and realistic without being, as it were, photographic, if you get my point.
Absolutely.
We tend to think of Romanesque art as being unlifelike and not as lifelike as Gothic art. This is nonsense. Because what is to be deemed lifelike is what we ourselves bring to an image. And if it's lifelike to you, a stick man is lifelike to a kid. And actually, you know, this is a massive problem in image theory, but to answer your question, I think no. I think they do elongated figures because they're elegant, or because they're strange, or because they want to get a point. But they know what they're doing, and on the whole, it's not visually compensating.
Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
So our next question, which ties into a bit of what you've spoken about beauty, and what you just showed us, not all tombs there can necessarily show sort of gruesome things. They can have a beauty. Someone's asked this question: with the idealization in artworks and sculptures away from the fear of decay towards beauty, was it also a way of making Christianity easier to embrace for the general populace, or just a reflection of the wealth of those who paid for it?
Oh, great question. Fantastic. Well, if I may just say so, I tried to deal with this in my recent book on, forgive the plug, but I have sort of been thinking about this in my recent writing about Gothic sculpture. Yeah, it's all sorts of things. There is a view that the kind of realism that you see, kind of photorealism that you get in the 13th century, where you get, like Queen Eleanor of Castile, where it's idealized, but it's also really beautiful, that actually makes you identify more effectively with these images. Now, I don't believe that. Because as I just said, I think the keynote in this is very much that we tend to overlook the percipient, the viewer. If a viewer decides that something is realistic for them, or if they project onto an image and find the image satisfying, in a sense, how the image looks is not necessarily primary. But I have not the slightest doubt to address the question that in the 13th century, these most beautiful tombs and sculptures around doorways and angels and Virgin Marys and whatever the plural is, and are the product of massively funded cathedral workshops, which are like enormous laboratories for the development of this kind of technique. It takes huge technique, enormous collaboration, hundreds and hundreds of young people being trained up who are all competing with one another to produce these amazing monuments. And the tombs are a spin-off of that. They're part of the same culture. So you've got to have something like, I mean, think of like a modern laboratory. You know, if you get scale, you get a lot of interconnectedness, which is why in Germany they know what's going on in France, and in France they know what's going on in Spain, and the Spanish things, you know, they know what's going on in Germany. It's amazingly international. Of course it is, because you've got a kind of group of producers who are dependent on money. And at the heart of this is the wealth and power of the 13th century diocesan church and the crown. The kings are very powerful and very rich, and the cathedral churches, which are the at the forefront of pushing, the pastoral revolution in that period, which produces the modern idea of the sinner and confession and heresy and intolerance. All those things are coming up, bubbling up at this particular time. All those things are, absolutely premised on money and power. So there is a connection, I think, and the beauty. If you're a good old-fashioned Marxist, and I'm sort of, I sometimes am, you'd say if this is ideology, it's concealing the truth of this. So there's a lot to be said about this, and very often art historians don't think enough about it. So great question.
Right, and kind of linked into what we've just spoken about wealth. Someone's asked that who would typically own Memento Mori items personally?
That's a very good question. It's something actually that Steve Perkinson will probably shed some light on. I think for the most part, well, the interesting thing, the little brass I showed at the end of Brightwell Baldwin, John Smith, a yeoman farmer, something like that would cost about £5. A yeoman farmer could probably afford something like that, of that degree of simplicity. Small ivory objects of the type I was showing you, the little things that you put in your pocket, like little crucifixes or beads, beautifully carved beads, could be quite widely distributed in the population. I'm not sure that it's known. I would guess that they're a middle class thing. I would guess. I've not gone into that, but I think it is always a good question, how these things are socially grounded. But I doubt very much that the people working in the fields have them, though they would have seen them in their churches. Similar things.
Thanks, Paul. You touched on the images of the dance macabre and the free living and the free dead. And you mentioned that it wasn't really seen, certainly the dance macabre wasn't seen before the 15th century. Was this because of liturgical reasons or political beliefs?
Well, there's a huge literature on the origin of the dance of death, and we might very well ask why it doesn't appear earlier. When the expression, there's a problem with the word macabre actually, because in the early French sources it has an accent, acute accent on the final E, which suggests that they called it macabre, not macabre, but macabre. And it's first referred to in, I think, the 1360s or 1370s, and it's first depicted around that time. It could be because dance itself is being formulated as a courtly activity in exactly that period. And I think death things are often a bit parasitical on genre that already exists. In other words, to have a dance of death, you have to have, first of all, dance. You have to have a sense of it as a courtly, decorous thing that is codified. That's going on very much in the 14th century with the codification of manners and so on. And just as Transi tombs and cadaver tombs and two-tier tombs, play on shrines and older forms of tomb, I think things like the dance of death are products in a way of a certain kind of courtly or middle-class culture where dance is becoming a mark of social status. And the whole point about the dance of death is that it shows everybody from the Pope to the merest peasant, all of them are dragged off in the dance. So it totally sort of undermines, deconstructs, the dance as an elitist thing. Everybody's dragged in, whether they like it or not. And we've all had an experience as teenagers or whatever, where you feel you've got to go onto the dance floor with somebody, and it is hell actually. If you don't want to, so it's not stupid. It does pick up on an anxiety, and I think that anxiety may be a kind of social anxiety, but we don't really know is the short answer. The origins of things are always very hard to pinpoint.
Thanks, Paul. And someone's just touched on a little bit on that, but looking more into the geography across Europe of different beliefs. But would you say, in your opinion, that in Northern Europe, and looking at Germany in particular, imagery concentrated more on the macabre than, say, in the Southern Europe, like in Italy?
Yeah. Well, I have thought about that in writing about my little book on medieval death. This may be true. It is curious. You do get macabre things in Italy. It's easy to overlook them, but I think the really horrible ones, the sorts of things I was showing you today with snakes coming out of them, are English, French, Netherlandish, Teutonic, German territories. Remember, Germany doesn't exist at that time, but all the way across to Poland, up into Scandinavia, possibly Spain. You don't tend to get it so much in Italy. You get it a bit. And I wondered at the time whether it had something to do with cultural attitudes to the body, because curiously, in the Mediterranean territory, Southern Europe, at funerals, the body was exposed. Whereas in Northern Europe, the coffin was adopted, so the body was hidden. And the paradox is that where the coffin hides the body in the north, you get the macabre imagery, whereas in Italy, where the body is exposed, you don't. Now, go figure. I mean, so there is a geographical difference. It is still, I think, yet to be explained, and art historians never agree about anything. So I'm not going to lay the law down. But yeah, there is a sort of pattern of that nature, and it is very interesting to think why. And although I want to just say, things don't have simple causes.
Thanks, Paul. I think we've got time for one more question. I think it might be out of the remit of the medieval time period, but let's see what you think, Paul. What images are there that shows the assimilation of Vikings and medieval ecclesiastical beliefs?
Wow. Yes, gosh, it's always the last one, isn't it? I can't, you know, I'm sorry, I don't know. Assimilation of Vikings. I mean, you've got, of course, you know, in the 9th and 10th centuries, you've got tremendous standing sculptures and so on. But whether they tell us much about the assimilation of the two, I don't know. I have to tell you that I'm a Goth. You know, I do the High Middle Ages, and I don't dwell too much in the early Middle Ages. So I'm going to flunk on that one. I wouldn't want to mislead anybody. I don't actually offhand know. Sorry.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for answering those questions, and thank you, everyone, for commenting and sort of for all your questions there. If we haven't answered your question, I'll do my best to try and get back to you, and we'll try and get answers for you. And I see there's been quite a few comments just coming in about the catacombs in Palermo. So yeah, we can have more information about that. No problem.
Right.
So thank you so much, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us. Do join us next week, everyone, where we've got Dr. Cindy Wood from the University of Winchester, who's going to be talking to us about how people would embrace or sort of deal with the horrors of purgatory and try to get time off in purgatory, and how beliefs about purgatory physically manifest themselves in the real world. So do join us for our lecture next week. Do keep commenting though, do share this film, and if you've got any questions, do get in touch with us. But once again, thank you so much, Paul, and thanks everyone for joining us for another Thursday lunchtime lecture.